Karen's face contorted with rage as she stared down at the vibrant flowers lining Sandra's neatly manicured front yard. How dare that insufferable woman flaunt her perfect landscaping, while Karen's own pitiful garden withered in the summer heat. Without a moment's hesitation, Karen stormed towards the flower bed, a gallon of bleach in hand. "This'll teach her to show off," Karen muttered under her breath, uncapping the bottle. She began pouring the caustic liquid over the unsuspecting blooms, a twisted smile spreading across her face as the flowers wilted and discolored before her eyes. Unbeknownst to Karen, Sandra watched the entire scene unfold from her living room window, expression morphing from shock to fury. She reached for her phone, fingers trembling as she activated the security camera facing her front yard. If that spiteful woman thought she could get away with sabotaging Sandra's hard work, she had another thing coming. As the last of the bleach drained from the bottle, Karen tossed it aside and stepped back to admire her handiwork. The once vibrant flower bed now lay in ruin, petals wilted and leaves discolored. She let out a self-satisfied chuckle, already imagining the look on Sandra's face when she discovered the destruction. Little did Karen know, her vindictive act had been captured in crystal-clear detail. Meanwhile, Sandra's heart raced as she reviewed the security footage, her face flushing with anger. How dare that insufferable woman attack her property like this? She rewound the video, scrutinizing every frame, committing Karen's face to memory. This was war. Without hesitation, Sandra dialed the police, her voice trembling with fury as she reported the vandalism. The operator listened intently, assuring her that an officer would be dispatched immediately to investigate. Sandra thanked them and hung up, her gaze once again drawn to the ruined flower bed outside. "Just wait until the cops get a load of this," she muttered, a steely resolve hardening her features. Back on the sidewalk, Karen strutted away, confident that she had gotten away with her petty revenge. She failed to notice the small, discreet camera mounted on the eaves of Sandra's house, its red recording light blinking steadily. As the sound of sirens approached in the distance, Karen's triumphant smile slowly faded. She had made a grave mistake in underestimating her neighbor's resourcefulness. This was far from over. The shrill wail of police sirens pierced the quiet suburban afternoon as two patrol cars pulled up to Sandra's house. Karen froze in her tracks, heart pounding as the officers quickly exited their vehicles and approached her. "Ma'am, we've received a report of vandalism at this address," the first officer stated sternly, eyeing Karen with suspicion. "Would you mind accompanying us back to the scene?" Karen's mouth went dry as she realized her scheme had been discovered. Panic surged through her, but she quickly schooled her features into an expression of feigned innocence. "Officers, I'm not sure what you're talking about," she replied, silently cursing herself for lingering in the vicinity. "I was just taking a stroll around the neighborhood." The second officer narrowed his eyes, unconvinced by Karen's nonchalant demeanor. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe you were responsible for the damage to the flowers in that front yard. We'd like you to come with us and answer a few questions." Realizing there was no escaping the situation, Karen reluctantly agreed, her heart racing as the officers escorted her back to Sandra's house. She could already see the smug satisfaction on her neighbor's face as the cops approached. Sandra greeted the officers with a grim expression, her eyes hardening when they landed on Karen. "Thank you for coming so quickly. As you can see, that woman poured bleach all over my flowers. I have it all on camera." The first officer nodded, gesturing towards the ruined flower bed. "We'll need to take a look at that footage, ma'am. And we'll need to ask you both a few questions." Karen's stomach twisted as the realization dawned on her. Her scheme had been foiled, and she was about to face the consequences of her actions. She had underestimated Sandra's resourcefulness, and now she was trapped, left to face the music. As the officers began their investigation, Karen could only watch, helpless, as the web of her own making slowly unraveled around her. The officers meticulously examined the security footage, their brows furrowed as they watched Karen's vindictive act play out in vivid detail. With each passing second, Karen's heart sank lower, her face flushing with a mixture of shame and dread. "Ma'am, the evidence is quite clear," the first officer said, turning his stern gaze towards Karen. "You intentionally vandalized your neighbor's property. That's a serious offense." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Confronted with the damning video evidence, she knew any attempt at denial would be futile. I don't know what came over me," she stammered, her voice small and wavering. "I was just so upset about my own garden, and That's no excuse," the second officer interjected, cutting her off. "Destroying someone else's property is against the law, regardless of the reason. You're going to have to come with us." As the officers moved to place Karen under arrest, Sandra watched with a grim sense of satisfaction. She had anticipated this moment, and she was determined to see it through to the end. No more would she tolerate Karen's petty acts of sabotage and her entitled behavior. "Make sure you get everything on the record," Sandra insisted, her eyes never leaving Karen's face. "I want her to face the full consequences of her actions." The officers nodded, carefully documenting the evidence and preparing to transport Karen to the police station. As they guided her towards the waiting patrol car, Karen's panic began to set in. She had never imagined that her spiteful act would lead to such dire consequences. "Please, you have to understand," she pleaded, desperate to avoid the looming legal repercussions. "I'll pay for the damage. I'll do anything. Just don't arrest me." But the officers remained unmoved, their expressions hardened by the seriousness of the offense. Karen's fate was sealed, and she had no choice but to accept the consequences of her reckless actions. As the patrol car pulled away, Sandra let out a long, shaky breath. While she felt a sense of vindication, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the right course of action. Had she taken things too far? The sterile holding cell felt oppressive as Karen paced back and forth, her mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. Disbelief, fear, and a growing sense of regret consumed her thoughts as the gravity of the situation sank in. How had a moment of petty revenge spiraled so far out of control? Karen replayed the events in her mind, cringing at the memory of her own impulsive actions. She had allowed her jealousy and resentment toward Sandra to cloud her judgment, and now she was facing the consequences. As the minutes ticked by, the reality of her predicament became increasingly overwhelming. Karen knew she was in serious trouble. The evidence against her was damning, and she had no doubt that the authorities would pursue the matter vigorously. Panic gripped her as she contemplated the potential legal ramifications. Would she face hefty fines? Possibly even jail time. The thought of being incarcerated filled her with a sense of dread, and she shuddered at the prospect of having a criminal record. Suddenly, the sound of the cell door opening jarred Karen from her spiraling thoughts. A stern-faced officer stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Davis, the detective is ready to speak with you now," he announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as she followed the officer down the dimly lit corridor, her legs feeling like jelly. She knew she would have to face the consequences of her actions, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead was almost too much to bear. As she entered the interrogation room, her gaze immediately locked with Sandra's. Her neighbor's eyes burned with a mixture of triumph and something else. Was it pity? Karen couldn't quite discern the emotion, but it only served to heighten her feelings of shame and vulnerability. The detective cleared his throat, drawing Karen's attention. "All right, Mrs. Davis, let's start from the beginning. I want you to tell me everything about what happened earlier today." With a deep, shaky breath, Karen prepared to recount the events that had led her to this precarious position. She knew there was no turning back now. Her fate was in the hands of the law, and she would have to face the consequences, no matter how severe. Karen's hands trembled as she recounted the events of the day, her voice wavering with each word. She described her overwhelming frustration with her own lackluster garden, and how the sight of Sandra's vibrant flower bed had ignited a spark of jealousy and resentment within her. I just couldn't stand the way she was always showing off, Karen admitted, her gaze downcast. I know it was wrong, but I just wanted to wipe that smug look off her face. The detective listened intently, jotting down notes as Karen spoke. Sandra, seated across the table, watched the proceedings with a stoic expression, her lips pressed into a thin line. So you admit to intentionally pouring bleach on Mrs. Hoffman's flowers? The detective pressed, his brow furrowed. Karen nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Yes, I did it. I didn't think she would find out. But then the police showed up, and she trailed off, a shudder running through her. The detective leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Davis, I hope you understand the gravity of your actions. Vandalism is a serious offense, and the evidence against you is quite compelling. Karen's heart sank as the weight of his words sank in. I know, she stammered, and I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the damages, I'll do anything, just please don't arrest me. The detective shared a weighted glance with Sandra, who remained silent throughout the exchange. After a moment of tense silence, he cleared his throat. Mrs. Davis, I'm going to be honest with you. The decision to press charges is ultimately up to Mrs. Hoffman. If she chooses to do so, you could be facing significant fines and even possible jail time. Karen's eyes widened in horror, and she instinctively turned to Sandra, a desperate plea written across her features. Please, Mrs. Hoffman, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. Just don't let them arrest me. Sandra held Karen's gaze, her expression unreadable. The weight of the decision rested heavily on her shoulders, and she knew that whatever choice she made would have lasting consequences for both of them. The silence in the interrogation room was palpable as Sandra considered Karen's plea. Her neighbor's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and desperation, a stark contrast to the smug satisfaction that had adorned her face just hours earlier. Sandra's mind raced as she weighed her options. On one hand, she was outraged by Karen's blatant disregard for her property and the sheer audacity of her actions. She had a right to seek justice and ensure that Karen faced the full consequences of her crime. But on the other hand, Sandra couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for the woman sitting across from her. The fear and remorse etched across Karen's features was undeniable, and deep down, Sandra knew that a criminal record could have devastating, long-lasting effects on her life. As the detective observed the silent exchange between the two women, he cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. Mrs. Hoffman, I understand this is a difficult decision, but the choice is ultimately yours. Do you wish to press charges against Mrs. Davis? Sandra's gaze flickered back and forth between Karen and the detective, her brow furrowed in deep contemplation. She knew that her decision would have a profound impact, not only on Karen's life, but on the fragile dynamic between the two neighbors. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sandra drew a deep breath and spoke. I don't want to press charges, detective. I think this has all been a big misunderstanding. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief, and she stared at Sandra, speechless. The detective, too, seemed taken aback by the unexpected turn of events. Are you sure about this, ma'am? The detective asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. The evidence against Mrs. Davis is quite compelling, and vandalism is a serious offense. Sandra nodded, her expression resolute. I'm sure. I just want this whole ordeal to be over with. I don't want to see Mrs. Davis face any further legal consequences. As the detective reluctantly agreed to release Karen without formal charges, a tangible sense of relief washed over the room. Karen's shoulders sagged as the tension drained from her body, and she turned to Sandra, her eyes brimming with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. Mrs. Hoffman, I don't know what to say, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Sandra raised a hand, silencing her. Just don't let this happen again, Karen. I'm giving you a second chance, but I won't be so forgiving next time. With a nod, Karen accepted the unspoken truce, and the two women exited the station, their relationship forever altered by the events of the day. As Karen and Sandra walked out of the police station, an uneasy silence hung between them. The tension that had once defined their relationship had given way to an uncertain truce, a fragile peace forged from the ashes of their confrontation. Karen glanced nervously at her neighbor, still struggling to comprehend Sandra's unexpected decision to forego pressing charges. I don't understand, he said hesitantly. Why did you do that? After everything I did, why didn't you want me to face the consequences? Sandra paused, her gaze fixed on the horizon as she considered the question. Honestly, Karen, I'm not entirely sure myself, she admitted, her voice tinged with a hint of uncertainty. When I saw the look on your face back there, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. Karen blinked, taken aback by Sandra's admission. Sympathy. But I destroyed your flowers. I should be facing the full force of the law, not getting off scot-free. Sandra sighed, turning to face Karen directly. I know, and believe me, a part of me still wants to see you punished for your actions. But the truth is, I don't think that's the best way to resolve this. She paused, her brow furrowing as she searched for the right words. Look, I know we've had our differences, Karen, but at the end of the day, we're both just trying to live our lives and take care of our homes. Maybe this whole thing is a chance for us to start over, to put the past behind us and try to understand each other better. Karen stared at Sandra, her expression a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. You really mean that? After everything I've done? Sandra nodded, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I do. I'm willing to give you another chance, Karen, but I need you to promise me something. Anything? Karen replied, her voice barely above a whisper. No more sabotage, no more petty revenge, Sandra said firmly. If you have a problem with me or my property, I want you to come to me directly and we'll work it out. Can you do that? Karen hesitated for a moment, the weight of Sandra's request settling heavily on her shoulders. But as she met her neighbor's unwavering gaze, she knew that this was a chance she couldn't afford to squander. Yes, I can do that, she said, her voice steadier than it had been all day. I promise, Sandra. No more games, no more stunts. I'll come to you from now on, I swear it. With a nod, Sandra extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Karen reached out and grasped it firmly. In that simple gesture, the foundations of a new understanding began to take shape, a glimmer of hope amidst the ashes of their former rivalry. In the days that followed, an uneasy truce settled over the once contentious relationship between Karen and Sandra. Gone were the furtive glances and the simmering resentment that had once defined their interactions. Instead, a newfound sense of cautious stability had taken root, a fragile bridge spanning the divide between the two women. Karen, acutely aware of the second chance she had been granted, made a conscious effort to keep her promise. Whenever an issue arose with her own struggling garden or Sandra's immaculate landscaping, she resisted the urge to retaliate, opting instead to approach her neighbor with an open and honest dialogue. To her surprise, Sandra proved to be more receptive than Karen had ever imagined. The two women found common ground in their shared passion for gardening, and slowly, tentatively, they began to build a rapport based on mutual understanding and respect. It wasn't always easy, of course. Old habits died hard, and there were moments when the temptation to resort to their former ways of dealing with conflict threatened to resurface. But each time, they would take a step back, remembering the gravity of the situation they had narrowly avoided, and they would choose a different path forward. As the weeks turned into months, the transformation in their relationship became increasingly apparent. The once vigilant security cameras that had captured Karen's act of vandalism were quietly dismantled, and the vibrant flower bed that had been the source of so much strife now served as a symbol of their newfound harmony. Neighbors who had once whispered about the feud between Karen and Sandra now marveled at the change, speculating about the events that had transpired and the unexpected resolution that had emerged from the ashes of their conflict. For the two women at the center of it all, the journey had been a humbling one, a reminder that even the most entrenched of rivalries could be overcome with a willingness to listen, to understand, and to forgive. As they tended to their gardens side by side, Karen and Sandra knew that their relationship would never be the same as it had been before. But in its place, a new bond had formed, one built on mutual respect and a shared appreciation for the simple joys of life. And in that, they found a measure of peace, a testament to the power of redemption and the capacity for change that lies within us all.